I'm Caitlin Dryden, and this is Slut. I'm Caitlin Dryden, and welcome to Slut, the show where I question who is and what makes a slut. 53% of you listening are men right now, which was really surprising to learn because I would say this is a staunchly feminist show. I'm not sure if you're hate listening or if the show just titillates you, but I'm happy to have you here. And since I do have your attention, if you have any questions about male sexuality that you want me to dive into, you can email me at slutpodcast@gmail.com. You can also hit me up on Instagram at Caitlin Dryden and at slutpodcast. And if you are really, really shy and you don't want me to know your name or anything, when this episode comes out, I will put an anonymous question box on my story and you can submit something there. And since we're talking about men right now, I thought that I would play this clip that I found on TikTok last night. And it's this girl who just created this new account, and it's called Boy Room. And she goes around to all these different guys' rooms in New York and rates them and interviews them. So let's play that clip.
What's with the steering wheel?
I like cars.
This place is gorgeous.
Really?
Yeah, it's really nice.
I've never heard that.
Jerome's room is like a beautiful space that's extremely well lit. However, he has made it completely hostile. His TV isn't connected to anything.
Do you not make the bed?
No.
Navy sheets, no duvet cover, sweat stains on the pillows.
Deodorants in the bed.
Duvet covers are super overrated. You just wash that and keep it moving.
His plant is dying. His closet feels like a tower from like Lord of the Rings or something. He has all of his underwear and socks in a Tupperware.
That's my socks and boxers drawer.
Okay, did you work for GoPuff or what's with the hat?
That's the cat's hat.
Yeah, it's got her hair on it.
I'm obsessed with the throat spray at his bedside table. That is such a Cosmo mom hot tip for BJs.
Yeah, soothe the throat every once in a while.
That's awesome.
My epic vision for Jerome's room is that I would get a dresser for the socks and underwear because he deserves to be able to pick a fresh pair. And for Jerome's shelf, I would take off all the junk from one side and evenly disperse some nice decorations. Also, it would be nice to have a painting over his bed, maybe of himself, because I think he's handsome. I would also get him a duvet cover. Come on, let's get real. Jerome is a gorgeous man, but he's still just a messy boy with car parts.
All right. So the reason why I played that clip is because it's hilarious. And I wish I came up with that joke for the throat spray, the Cosmo. That was hilarious. But part of the reason is because I'm in New York right now and I'm recording from a studio, which, you know, usually I'm just like in the corner of my bedroom in LA. And I came out here to, you know, have a little trip and see how I feel about the city. And I realized that when I came here, that the last time I was in New York was 9 years ago this month. And I was visiting my cousin who was going to Parsons at the time, and she still lives here. And I was like thinking back about that trip. And I remember this one night. So I was 17 at the time, and my cousin and I, we had our fake IDs that we got in downtown Toronto, and they were our Quebec fake IDs. And with your Quebec fake ID, you got like a student ID from one of the universities in Canada. So you could like show two pieces. And my second fake ID was like from Concordia. So what I would do when I was like a teenager is I would tell everybody that I met that I went to Concordia for graphic design, and everybody would just like stop asking me questions after that. I would come up with this whole story about my life. Anyways, I remember this one club that we went to in Manhattan. It was the Lower East Side. And I think it was this party that happened like once a month called Slate. And I'm not sure if it was called Slate, but it started with an S. And we went with all of these like well-known drag queens in the city. And there was this couple, they were a drag couple together. Ruby was one of the wives. At the time, she was a husband still, and now she's transitioned to female. And her wife was Queenie Satine, who's actually now a porn star in Los Angeles. But anyways, I was 17 partying with all these people. And I remember this club, it had like 5 different stories, and each story had a different theme going on. And I honestly feel like that experience in New York was like really foundational for me. And so it's been kind of cool coming back here. I mean, 9 years later, I'm now 27 and experiencing the city in a different way. So I arrived late on Thursday night, and then on Friday I got dinner with a friend, and then I went to one of my cousin's DJ gigs in Bushwick, and her DJ name is Adobe Princess. You should go to her events. She's an amazing DJ, and it was just like so fun. She did such a great job, and we took a little bit of shrooms, and she gave me like this bottle of poppers, and I just was like on the dance floor, like sniffing the poppers like all night. And that's probably part of the reason why my voice sounds like shit today. A little groggy. Then on Saturday, went out with a bunch of friends, and then on Sunday we went to Nowadays. She got there at 9 a.m. I got there at 10 a.m. because I had a late night. And it's, how do I describe Nowadays? It's a 24-hour rave party, I guess at the end of Bushwick in Queens. And it has like a real community vibe. I honestly wish we had something like that in LA. And it was super fun. It was interesting. And I was told that I looked too fresh. So, I guess that's like a comment that you get if you're too fresh and well rested, then you get a little bit of hate. So you know what? It was a comment, but I didn't mind it. And yeah, I mean, it's just been a fun time, you know, just like sledding it up in the city a little bit. And so with that, I thought we would, you know, go to Slut in the News because, if you haven't listened to these solo episodes before, I have 2 segments that I like to go through, which is Slut in the News and then Favorite Slut, which is where I talk about a slut from history. And today's slut is pretty chaotic, but let's first start off with the more serious stuff. So scientists have eliminated HIV cells in a lab, sparking new hopes for a cure. Researchers are saying that the technology could be used one day to eradicate the virus from someone in its entirety, but there's still a lot more work to do before we get to that. And as I'm sure you know, there is no cure for HIV, but medicines can suppress the amount of virus in someone's system to an undetectable level, making it untransmittable. And also we have like so much more access to PrEP and drugs like that to stop people from getting it. I actually met this guy over the weekend who works for this PR firm, and they have just created a drug. I don't know if it's been approved by the FDA yet, but it's a PrEP drug that you will inject once a year, and then you'll be good. And they're trying to market it to women as well, not just like gay men. And hopefully it will become a drug, a vaccine, like we have with HPV. So you like take it and it's just like a common thing. And then HIV could be eradicated. So the other week, this is our second story. The Washington Post released this exposé titled "Women Are Getting Off Birth Control Amid Misinformation Explosion." And I really wanted to talk about this piece for obvious reasons, but also because I released an episode in the fall with Lisa Hendrickson-Jack, who is a fertility specialist, and we talked about how to have natural birth control. And personally, I don't take birth control. I've been off it for a few years right now. So I wanted to talk about like this serious issue with women getting off birth control, and then talk about my experience with it. So let's just like get one thing clear before I get into this. I believe that women should be armed with the right information so they can make informed decisions about their health. But in America, we are living in a time where where people are trying to actively take rights away from women. And I think that should be coupled with your decision to stop taking birth control. So let's get to the article, and I'm going to read a good amount of this. Physicians say they're seeing an explosion of birth control misinformation online targeting a vulnerable demographic, people in their teens and early 20s who are more likely to believe what they see on their phones because of algorithms that feed a stream of videos reinforcing messages often divorced from scientific evidence. While doctors say that hormonal contraception, which includes birth control pills and IUDs, is safe and effective, they worry the profession's long-standing lack of transparency about some of the serious but rare side effects has left many patients seeking information from unqualified communities. Michael Belmonte, a OBGYN in DC and a family planning expert with the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, said people are putting themselves out there as experts on birth control and speaking to things that the science does not bear out. And I am seeing direct failures of this misinformation. He says women frequently come in for abortions after believing what they see on social media about the dangers of hormonal birth control and the effectiveness of tracking periods to prevent pregnancy. Many of these patients have traveled from states that have completely banned or partly banned abortions, including Texas, Idaho, Georgia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. Women of color whose communities have historically been exploited by the medical establishment may be particularly vulnerable to misinformation, given the long history of mistrust around birth control in this country. And if you know anything about the history of birth control, you know that they used women of color to test birth control on. They didn't tell them what they were doing. And they were like giving them like super high dosages. And these women like had long lasting effects. And I believe some of them died from it. Nicole Betty-Ann, who has more than 1 million combined followers on Instagram and TikTok for her holistic health coaching business, shared on social media that she stopped using hormonal birth control because she was concerned about weight gain, low libido, and intermittent bleeding, which she assumed were the side effects. Which, I mean, yeah, that happens. And I mean, that happens in, I think just in everyday life. So her TikTok is all about getting off birth control and becoming a cycle syncing nutritionist who teaches women how to live in tune with their menstrual cycles. All of her videos have drawn 10.5 million views. That is like crazy. And she is not a licensed medical specialist. So, I mean, that's quite concerning. TikTok recently removed at least 5 videos linking birth control to mental health issues and other health problems after the Washington Post asked the company how it prevents the spread of misinformation. One of the videos removed was her saying that certain forms of birth control could make users susceptible to STIs, which experts say the evidence does not support. And I mean, that's ridiculous. Birth control does not make you more susceptible to STIs, unless it would be the situation where people don't use condoms and they're just relying on birth control. But that's like a user problem, not a problem with the pill. And here is where it gets even more concerning. And I think this is like what we really need to be focusing on as feminists and people who support women, is that prominent conservative commentators have seized upon the mistrust of medical professionals, sowing misinformation as a way to discourage the use of birth control. Some commenters inaccurately depict hormonal contraception as causing abortions. Others say they're just looking out for women's health. Brett Cooper, a media commentator for the Conservative Daily Wire, argued in a viral TikTok clip that birth control can impact fertility, causing women to gain weight and even alter who they are attracted to. Yeah, I mean, I think there is that conversation so much about how birth control alters who you're attracted to. And I'm just going to say it's not true. I've been attracted to assholes on and off birth control. It racked up over 219,000 likes before TikTok removed it following the post inquiry. Candace Owens denounced birth control pills and IUDs as unnatural, saying that she's a big advocate of getting women to realize that this stuff is not normal, and claiming that viewers of her content told her copper IUDs can harm women's fertility. Medical experts say that there is no evidence that birth control impacts fertility long term. On his show, Ben Shapiro called discussing birth control side effects a political third rail while interviewing a guest who proclaimed that women on birth control pills are attracted to men who are less traditionally masculine. All forms of medication, including hormonal birth control, can have side effects, some rare but serious. Birth control pills that contain estrogen can lead to blood clots and strokes, and IUDs can proliferate the uterine wall. The Food and Drug Administration points out that the risk of developing blood clots from using birth control pills, 3 to 9 women out of 10,000 who are on the pill, remains lower than the risk of developing blood clots in pregnancy and postpartum period. Jenny Wu, who is an OBGYN resident at Duke University, noticed that her Gen Z patients were turning away from IUDs at higher rates than her millennial patients, and were referencing TikToks about the pain of IUD insertion, which I'm going to talk more about personally in just a second. So she analyzed 100 of the most popular TikTok videos about IUDs and found that a surprisingly high proportion, almost 40%, were all negative. She said, quote, "It's changed how I practice." She now routinely offers patients a variety of pain management options, including anti-inflammatory drugs, and I don't know how to say that, an iodine injection. That sounds nice, and anti-anxiety medications. So that's pretty much the entire article. And since we've gone through that, I will start at the beginning with like my birth control journey. So I didn't have much sex in high school, so I did not need to be on birth control. But when I went off to college and I lost my virginity, I decided to get an IUD because I just didn't want to think about having to take a pill every day. And so I got the one at the time called Kylena, which is actually now discontinued. And it was it was a 3-year one. And the insertion hurt. It hurt, but it wasn't too bad. And while I was on it, I liked it. Like, I didn't actually like not getting my period for that long. It felt kind of weird to not have your period for 3 years, but overall it was good. And the strings that fell down softened up, and it wasn't a big deal. But classically, my mom and I, and I'm sure my sister, we have really small cervixes. So when I went back in to get the IUD taken out and get a new one put back in, I can't remember what it was called, but it was the one for 5 years, the really common one. So I went back in and she took it out. That was fine. And then she inserted the new IUD and she put it in wrong. So she had to take it out of my cervix and then she put it back in and she put it in wrong. And that happened 3 times. It was so painful. And I only had an Advil because that's what they told you to take before. The pain was so bad that I ended up fainting in the office, and I went home and I knew something wasn't right. I knew something wasn't right, and I felt like I was having contractions. So like they were coming like every 15 minutes, and I actually was having contractions. We'll get to that in just a second. And I developed a rash on my lower stomach. And so I called the doctor and they said to go in for an ultrasound the next day. So I went into the ultrasound and I had pain for the rest of the day. I was still in pain the next day. And when I was in the ultrasound, the woman turned to me and said, okay, I'm not supposed to be telling you this, but if you don't get this IUD taken out right now by a doctor, you're going to be removing it yourself. Your body has pushed your IUD out of your cervix and it's now in your vaginal canal. So I went to the doctor that afternoon and I got it taken out. It was, the removal wasn't painful because it was already out, but, yeah, I decided then, because I needed to get on birth control, that I was going to take the NuvaRing. And I used the NuvaRing for a year. And it did decrease my libido. My pussy was dry. I didn't want to have sex. I was more depressed, but that was also at the height of like my activism. So I was like depressed and anxious, but I won't attribute that to the NuvaRing. I'll just say just because I was really stressed out at that time. But yeah, it was fine. I only had a sex drive actually when I took out the NuvaRing. So you have like a withdrawal bleed where you don't have the ring at all. So the time when I wanted to have sex was when I was having my period, and I would always like fuck a few people like during that time. But then for the rest of the month, I did not want to have sex. And so then I got home and I got home after university. I finished school and I just stopped taking the NuvaRing because I wasn't sexually active. And then I ended up being celibate for a year because of COVID. COVID hit and I was like, well, I'm not going to take this. And so then I started tracking my period with Flow. And Flow is a really common period app, but I'm not exactly who they're sponsored by, but I do know that it's like right-wing people. So I don't use Flow anymore. I use Kindara. I would say if you're going to track your cycle, you should be using that. And like if you're using another platform, you should look into who is sponsoring, who is paying for that app. So I was celibate for a year and then I moved out to LA for 6 months and I met this guy the first week I was in LA. And, that's a whole story in itself. But a month later I was pregnant because I was tracking my period on that app and I didn't know anything. And I didn't think I was ovulating at that time, but I was ovulating. So I ended up getting pregnant. And yeah, I was alone in this new country navigating a new medical system, a shitty medical system. I didn't know what to do. I didn't really have friends out here. So it was like stressful. And I went to Planned Parenthood. And because I was Canadian, they charged me $900 for the abortion pill and the ultrasound, which is crazy, especially because it was Planned Parenthood. Like I went to them because I thought they would like help me more. And they did help me. The pregnancy was eliminated. Like it worked, but it was a fucking mess. So him and we split the abortion. And I did it at home. And then after that, they give you like at Planned Parenthood, they give you a pack of abortion pills, of birth control pills. So I started taking that for a month. And because of the abortion, my hormones were crazy, like just all over the place. And then adding more hormones into my system from the birth control, like just was a mess. So I stopped taking those pills. And then I ended up going back on the NuvaRing. And actually, when I had my abortion, I think I was under so much stress. I lost 35 pounds in a month from it. It was just like nuts. And so then when I went back on the NuvaRing, I gained all that weight back. And then same issues. My pussy was dry. I didn't want to have any sex. And that's like hard when like sex is a really big part of my life. And also I talk about sex on this show. So I'm like, I need to be having sex. So basically my health was like in shambles. Now we're at the end of 2022. It was just a lot was going on. And so I decided to get off the NuvaRing. And that's when I discovered Lisa Hendricks and Jack's work. And then I had her on the show. So if you haven't listened to that episode and you're curious about fertility tracking, I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty of it right now because I've already done that, but you should go and listen to that episode with her. And so I have found getting off birth control to be really empowering for myself. I think it has benefited me in a really good way. And now I track my cycle using my temperature and my cervical mucus to plan sex. And then also, like, I don't have a boyfriend right now, so I am using condoms when I'm sleeping with people, so I don't have to worry about that. But like I said, it's just been really empowering and taking my health back into my hands and being in control of my body. That's why I decided to get off it. And it's confusing because I love birth control. I think it's a really good thing, and I think as many women who want to take it should take it. And I think we should have access to it. But I think if you're not going to take birth control, you need to know what you are going to do in a situation if you do get pregnant. Personally, if I got pregnant again right now, I know I would have another abortion. I personally don't want to have another abortion until I'm ready, or I don't want to, when I'm ready to get pregnant, I want to have the baby. So I don't want to have one. But if I was in that position right now, I know what I would do. And I also now keep a stash of abortion pills in my cabinet. If you go to Aid Access, you can pay, if you're in the States, California for sure, you can do this. It's $150. They will mail you abortion pills within 5 days discreetly. And to me, paying $150 to have peace of mind and those pills last for 2 years really helps me, because I know that if I slip up or if something happens, I don't have to go, since I track my cycle, I can figure out where I am at in the pregnancy because I'm informed, and then I can just do it all at home, and I don't need to go into a medical office. And so if you're going off birth control, like I said, you need to know what you're going to do in that situation. And if you are going to have the pregnancy, you need to figure out you need to have a game plan of how you are going to care for that child. And I also think if you are going to be getting off birth control, you need to take note of the location that you're in. So I'm Canadian and I live in California. I'm not worried about access to abortion. And that's a privilege, but there are some of you listening who are living in Texas or in South Carolina or in any of these states that have rolled back access to abortion, where that should be in your decision to get off birth control. So yeah, this is a complicated thing because I do think birth control is great, and I think we should be taking it, but it's not, I don't know, the end all be all for some people. And it can affect your health. Some people work well with abortions some people work well with birth control and others don't. So yeah, I mean, this is a really complicated and complex issue, because I also do think that it's no surprise that people are getting and kind of being brainwashed to get off birth control during a time when pundits when people on the right are trying to take away rights from women. So this is something that we should really be thinking about. And hopefully, me telling you, my story has helped you kind of think about it in a more complex way. It's not good or bad for people to be getting off birth control. It's just kind of what is the best thing for them. And so after that, really bright, positive topic, I'm going to talk about I'm going to move on to the last segment, which is called My Favorite Slut. And like I said, that's where I take a slut from history and I talk about their lives. And I wouldn't say this person is like a favorite of mine. Like, I don't think she's like a good person, but I just thought this story was like crazy and fun, and I had to talk about it. So yesterday, I was staying with my friend in Chelsea, and honestly, I fucking hated Chelsea. It was miserable there. I ended up booking a hotel room in Brooklyn after one night there for last night and tonight. So I'm happy to be going there. But I was like, okay, I'm in Manhattan. I guess like any good like sex researcher, I should go to the Museum of Sex, which I honestly was kind of expecting not to be good. But I was like, okay, I just have to do it, and maybe I'll get some it will spark an idea to talk about today. And honestly, I went and it was profoundly underwhelming. So save your $45. You don't need to go. If you really want to go ahead. But it was really not, I was not impressed at all. I was much more impressed with the Erotic Heritage Museum in Vegas. I went last year, and I mean, it's not as aesthetically pleasing as the Museum of Sex, but it just was so much more interesting. Like, I learned so much there. And I also, like, at the Museum of Sex, they didn't talk about the complexities of sex at all. It was just all like fun. And the Erotic Heritage Museum went into like sexual assault and AIDS and all of these different things that are like really important and like foundational in the history of sex. So that was like kind of disappointing that they didn't do anything like that. But anyways, the Erotic Heritage Museum in Vegas, the first like showcase or, you know, whatever, was about this woman who is called the Countess Elizabeth Bathory. And she was born to a prominent Hungarian family in 1560, and is one of the earliest serial killers in history. And she was a sado-masochist. This bitch was nuts. She, at the end of the day, she ended up killing anywhere from 80 to 650 women. So we're going to get into what this bitch was up to. So growing up, she had a lot of health problems as a child. And that was probably due to the fact that her parents were cousins. So a little bit of weird stuff going on there. But when she was a kid, she was also exposed to extreme violence. And by the time she was 10 years old, she was considered a beautiful woman, which is disturbing, but that was, power for the course at the time. And when she was 10, she got engaged to Frederick Nadsky. I'm probably saying that wrong. Farron, whatever. I'm just going to call him whatever I want. And he was 15, and he was also a Hungarian count. And she moved into his parents' palace, and there is where she learned how to manage all of the estates. And she was really good at it. But around this time, you know, they were engaged for a few years. She ended up having an affair with a peasant boy, and she got pregnant and gave the child away secretly. So her husband and her were both freaks. They loved violence. They loved hurting people. And so her husband actually had this poor peasant boy castrated and then thrown to a pack of wild dogs. They got married in 1574 when she was 14, and thousands of people showed up to this party. And the party lasted for 3 days. And at the very height of this party, he gave her a gift. And that gift was her own castle. And they didn't spend a whole lot of time together in their first few years of marriage. He was off fighting the Ottomans, and he was actually like this amazing fighter because I'm sure he was such a fucking weird sex freak, and he just was like ready to kill. So it was her job to take care of the estates while he was gone. And like I said, this was her bag. She knew how to get shit done. She would house peasants who were in need in her castle at this time. And when her husband was back in town, they would bond over abusing these peasants. So one thing that they liked to do was they would roll up pieces of paper and then dip them in oil and then put the pieces of paper in between the peasants' toes and light them on fire. It's just like so insane. And so, this is like early on. We're not into the depths of despair of Elizabeth yet, but she killed a few servants at this time, but she just got away with it because they were considered scum. Like, peasants weren't considered people, so they were to be disposed of. And this is like how she got away with what she did for so long, because these people weren't considered anything. But because pastors kept on being called over to the castle to perform funeral rituals, they started to suspect something was happening. And one of the pastors actually called her out. He was like, I think there's something happening here. Like, this doesn't feel right. And how she got away with this is she would say that the peasants died from cholera. And so her and her husband ended up having 5 children, and the youngest was born in 1598. So over the next 10 years here is where things hit the fan. So around 1601, her husband became paralyzed. His legs, they stopped working. Not too sure why. But this is when Anna Darvola joined their house. And they said that she was a witch. I mean, we love witches on this show. We support them. But I don't think she was like the best witch. And this is when she became super sadistic, and Anna taught her how to kill people. Her husband died in 1604. And she was only 44. I think he was in her 50s. And at that time, her kids left the house, and she was alone in this castle. And, what else was there to do but murder peasants? So she got really into torturing and murdering young women. And there were over 400 servant girls across the estates. So she had access to so many victims, and they just never stopped coming. And then she created a crew of people who would help torture them. So they had all of these dungeons in the basement where they would do all this fucking crazy shit. And so this is like one particular story that was crazy. So the servants would be sewing, whatever they're sewing, maybe your clothes, fixing up stuff. And if they made a mistake, they would strip them down and bring them into the dungeon and then poke super long sewing needles into the tips of their fingers. And when they would cry in pain, Elizabeth would say, quote, "If it hurts the whore, she can pull it out." So I'm laughing just because I'm like, this is so insane. So the servant would think that, okay, she's telling me I can pull it out. So they would pull it out from their fingers. But when they would do that, Elizabeth would cut off their fingers with a knife. And there was this other story where she actually bit the skin off of one of the servants' face. And there was actually forced cannibalism, so that they would force the servants to like eat the other servant girls. And also, like, just to reiterate, she had a crew of people who would help her with this in the basement in these torture chambers. So it wasn't the best idea to kill all of your staff because you would have to rehire them and find more people to come in. And so things started to turn. By 1609, everyone knew what was happening at the castle, but nobody in the community could stop her. And then that same year, Anna Darvola, who I mentioned before, who was one of her aides, died of a stroke. And Elizabeth was running out of peasant women to torture, and her deaths were piling up. And so she got this idea from one of her sycophants, who was also a witch, to start killing higher class women because she believed that it would clear her debts. So to bring higher class women in, she started a finishing school for young noble women. And it was the perfect cover to get all of these people to come in and then murder them. But since these were women of a higher class, when they started dying, the parents were like, what the fuck happened? And I guess there was one story where one of the girls died, and the parents called, and Elizabeth said that, oh, I'm like talking like it's like they just rang her up. No, I'm sure it was a little bit more complicated. But Elizabeth told them that she went crazy and then murdered a bunch of the other girls, and that's how they all died. But since these were people of note, they appealed to King Matthias, yeah, whatever, the second, and he put Gorgio Thorez on the case. And Thorez was actually friends with Elizabeth's past husband, and on his deathbed, he promised that her dying husband that he would take care of Elizabeth and treat her well and look out for her. So he had like some complicated issue, like some complex feelings getting into this case and being assigned to this case because he made this promise to a friend, but he knew that he had to do something about this situation. So he began to interview witnesses and had dozens of people who confirmed her sadistic tendencies. And by December of 1610, he had enough evidence to arrest Elizabeth, but he wanted to make sure that they really had it locked in before they did anything. So the king and Thorez went over for dinner at Elizabeth's house, and of course she was a countess. She was a great host, but she was really nervous. She knew that something was going to happen. And after they had dinner, she gave them all cake. And after they ate the cake, they started to feel really sick. So she poisoned the cake, but luckily they got their asses out of there before anything could happen. But Thorez came back on New Year's Eve with an army of armed guards, and they were hiding outside. And Elizabeth stepped outside with her witch friend, and they began to cast a spell to protect her and bring death to Thorez. And it was then that the investigators went into the castle, and at the doors of the castle, there was a body of a mutilated young woman. And there was two other young women who were also mutilated close by. And then they began to hear screams from the dungeon, and they went down, and Elizabeth's sycophants were torturing women downstairs. So she was then immediately taken into custody. And of course, she said that she was innocent, and she blamed it all on her servants, saying that they were the real killers. She was never put on trial to have respect for her family and his family. And that's like what Thorez felt was like the better thing, is he was like honoring his friend's death wishes to take care of her, and like not put her on trial. But all of her sycophants were put on trial, and by confessing, they also like confessed to their crime. So a lot of them were killed or in prison. So where Elizabeth was put in prison was actually in her own castle in one of the dungeons. And in the end, 306 people testified against her. And like I said at the top, the reported murder count varied between 80 and 650, which is crazy. I'm sure it's like probably more up around the 600 range than the 80. I think we have to say that because we don't know for sure. And I mean, what a story of greed and blood and letting your kinks get out of hand. I don't really think there's a way to make this story positive in the end, because she ended up dying in her basement and hundreds of women died. But it just was really interesting to me, and I wanted to talk about it today. So, yeah, not too much to take out from that story. But thank you so much for listening to this episode of Slut, and make sure you're following me at Caitlin Dryden on Instagram and at Slut Podcast. And also subscribe to the show wherever you're listening and rate it 5 stars, leave a review. This really helps the show. And if you want to, you can watch this on YouTube, and you can also watch it on Spotify if you have not already done that. And so, yeah, that's all from me today. Thanks for sticking around, sluts, and I will be back in a few weeks with a new episode. Until then, stay slutty.